My guest today is my old friend Ted Neward. Ted, how are you, sir?
I'm doing fine, David. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I understand you have a new job. Tell me about it.
I do. I currently labor on behalf of Capital One. What's in your wallet? As a senior distinguished engineer (SDE), which is essentially it's an individual contributor track position. So I don't have anybody reporting to me, but it's a senior director or junior VP rank equivalent, which means they expect big things out of me. Um,
So
but I
do I.
work currently as part of an architecture group inside of the financial services division. So it's not part of the credit card. It's not part of the bank. It's part of the group that's everything else essentially
Hmm.
within Capital One.
All
So
right.
cool. It's a cool job.
Well,
I like the
it
company.
sounds like fun. You've always been distinguished in my book, and now you can add engineer to that title as well.
Most people would have said it the other way around. I've always been an engineer, but you know, gosh.
And I'm glad to hear that you haven't given up your public speaking. I saw you in Kansas City last night, and you gave an excellent talk about writing of all things at a
Indeed.
technical conference.
Writing prose,
Writing
not writing
prose,
code, writing prose.
writing prose. Yes, exactly. And I just I, I I've been in this business a long time, and I'm often shocked, really shocked by how poor so many people's writing skills are. That people get through college and they're into their career and they still cannot write a coherent sentence. And I don't tell me why is it important? Why if my job is to write code, why is it important for me to write prose as well?
So this is one of those things that we could spend a lot of time lamenting the American educational system, right? And part of this is we don't ask for it very often in any of the non-liberal arts classes. This is one of the reasons why actually I got very, very grumpy and very vocal when a lot of universities started shutting down their liberal arts programs in favor of STEM. Right, we got to go after STEM because that's
Nothing
what
wrong with
I pay.
STEM, but writing is also important.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's
Communication is important.
this notion that the things that the liberal arts folks will teach you aren't important. What we really need to get you into is hard science. And yet, if you go into any of the hard sciences, you'll see that they produce all these different papers and whatnot. And the same thing is true in the computer science space. The higher you go in your career, the more the ability to string together a cogent thought in written form really becomes. Whether it's email, whether it's a white paper. If you go down the startup track, you often have to, as part of your advertising and branding, you have to produce marketing copy. Even doing a conference, I have to submit an abstract that will catch the track chair's eye, that will catch the attendee's eye, and
Mhm.
get people into my session. And so, how do I write that? How do I communicate that clearly, et cetera? And unfortunately, this is one of those things that, for example, if you take a traditional computer science curriculum, writing appears nowhere inside of this anywhere. I mean, it's not a thing. We test you a lot on code. We'll ask you to build a database, but then to actually explain that, even though we will turn around and talk about the importance of documentation and making sure that everybody understands what you're doing, collaboration, we often demand those things in a professional setting, but we don't actually teach any of this. And so, being someone who is liberal arts educated, my degree was in international relations at UC Davis, and
Oh,
having spent a lot of time in the technical field, I'm going on
and
30.
you're an adjunct professor at the University of Washington.
Oh yes, yeah. Well, I'm not a. I don't know that I'm a full professor per se. I'm a guest lecturer.
Guest lecturer. Okay.
right? Which is to say, basically I'm part-time faculty,
Yeah. Okay.
and I teach mobile software development to the kids there, to the undergrads. Um, but I mean, there's all these cases where we ask people to do these things for which we've never trained them. That I thought it would be useful to put some slides together on how to do this, and it was pretty well received. I had a fair number of folks, come up to me afterwards and say, this is a great talk, love it. And just yesterday or the day before, I was in a meeting with folks at Capital One, and one of the senior software engineers remarked, I did not realize how important, writing, uh, and putting together slides and speaking, which is,
Communication. Huh?
yeah, that the communication thing. He had no idea how important that would be the further he got up in his career. He figured it would be, okay, I'm going to write a bunch of code as a junior, and then the code I write is going to be all that much more important, and writing the right code, it will be. No, the further up you go, the more you get away from writing code on a regular basis, and the more you get to influencing others within the organization, and communication and writing is a big part of that.
Yeah, the way I phrase it is there are a lot of things that are not part of what your core responsibilities are. If you're hired to be an engineer, you're hired to write code, and you can have an okay career, you can have a fine career, just sitting in the closet and writing good code, but you will hit a ceiling. And communication is one of them, both written and oral communication. If you have poor written and communication oral skills, that will tap exactly how far you can go.
Yeah, yeah, it's
And I
definitely,
think can I just start with you started your presentation with silence. You gave everybody an assignment, a reading assignment for about 10 minutes. We all sat in quietly and we read.
yep.
And that where did that idea come from?
So I cannot claim credit for that. I actually got that from Amazon. So there's a book called Working Backwards. Not surprisingly, it's in the Amazon book library. It's by two very senior members of Amazon, who are one was Bezos's chief of staff for a while when they instituted a lot of the policies and so forth that people love to cargo cult today. One of those was Bezos sent a memo banning the use of PowerPoint during any of the presentation meetings at Amazon. And the reason for that, summed up as succinctly as I can, is that a good presenter can make a bad idea look feasible, whereas a bad presenter can make a really good idea look terrible.
Okay.
But they found that if you are required to write it out and produce what they call a six pager, and the reason for that number six is very concrete and very science. Essentially, 6 pages is what the average adult can read in 20 minutes. And so the
Okay.
first third of every hour long meeting, everybody sits in silence, usually with a printed copy so that they can make notes directly on the
Right.
copy with a red pen. And then they give all those copies back to the presenter as a form of feedback, which is really useful. But you sit there and you read. It's just utter silence. And as I mentioned during the talk, that is like the most uncomfortable silence that, particularly as the creator of the presentation, of the essay, the memo, the six pager, you're just sitting there and you're just watching. And it's just the longest, 15 minutes. We actually did about 15 in the talk, because my essay came out to about, if printed, it probably would have been about 4 pages. And I didn't want to use a full 20 minutes because I did want to get back to talking a little bit about, other aspects
You
of
still got the point across.
right. Yeah, I mean, got to talk a little bit about the how to do it too. But I mean, it was a little awkward. There were a couple of people that wandered in after the talk started, after we were in that reading section, and
Scratch their
people were
heads.
like, "What the?" But the funny thing is, they saw on the slide, we will be reading for the next, 10 to 15 minutes. Here is the URL. And then frequently as they sat down, somebody else would look over, like somebody next to them would look over and like point to their phone and say, "Hey, this is what we're reading," and so they just went with it. They just went very smoothly with it, and it's a fascinating exercise. It really is. Both the reading of and the writing of one of these 6-pagers is, I mean, it Amazon employees routinely report that that is one of the hardest things for people to get used to at Amazon when you join the company is the silence at the start of every meeting. And people who've had to write one have remarked that it would be so much easier to do this as a presentation because I can just fall back on questions that you will ask during the presentation. I have now come to realize that in many respects trying to use a presentation to convey your idea without writing it out first is kind of it's a cop out. It's intellectual cheap. It's intellectually cheap to just say,
Okay.
I'll just talk my way through it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, most of us have more practice at talking than we do at writing. I think maybe that's the reason why. But you, on the other hand, have a lot of published works. You've written, I don't know, how many books have you written?
Um, That's actually that's a harder question to answer than you might think because in one particular case, O'Reilly took some of the prose I had written for one book and repurposed it for another.
Okay.
So I got 2 books for the price of one.
Okay. Well,
You
let's
know,
just say you've written a lot of books. I think that's a fair statement. And
it's
over the course of the last couple of decades.
yeah. So over the last 25 years, I have written somewhere plus or minus 10 books.
Right. And so I think a lot of your talk, you drew on that experience. As you were writing, you got better at writing, you learned how to write, and then you shared some of the knowledge with the rest of us. Share it with this broader audience, the literally tens of people watching at home today.
So the there's a whole bunch of first off, there are thousands of books out there on in the bookshelves on how to write. Unfortunately, a lot of like if you Google how to write well, you're going to get a lot of books that are going to teach you how to craft your storyline, right? In other words, a lot of it is about writing for fiction, how to
Okay.
create compelling characters, how to create plot twists, how to foreshadow who the villain is. You get a lot of
Yeah.
that kinds of stuff.
Stephen King has a really good book on that. It's called The Craft.
Yeah, exactly. And King actually, in he's an interesting one from the standpoint that one of his famous quotes from on writing, I think is in that book. He
I think I know
talked
what you're
about
saying.
slay your babies.
Yeah,
Right?
murder your darlings. I think was the example.
Yeah, exactly. Murder your darlings, slay your babies. I've heard it both ways.
Don't be afraid to
And
throw away stuff that you've written, even though it's yours. You love it.
well, and
But
in particular, as you write, you'll come up with a particularly just perfect turn of phrase, right? You'll just, oh, this is so solid, this is so awesome. Or you really want to talk about this one particular section, right? In a fiction setting, it might be a character that you've introduced that you really just identify with. You really like that character. But as you keep going, you identify the fact that this really isn't serving the purpose it was meant to, right? That the fact that I'm spending so much time talking about how the compiler generates bytecode out of an abstract syntax tree, all very interesting and very fascinating, not as relevant to a discussion of how to produce, a user interface,
right,
right? And so King's advice, murder your darlings, is basically to realize that just because you like it doesn't mean it belongs here. Now,
right.
go ahead and copy it, paste it someplace, put it where others can find it later, or you can put it to other purposes or what have you. But you can't have it here. You can't have it
Right.
as part of this particular piece. There's another book I will point out. It's done by one of my colleagues up here in the Seattle area, done by the name of Marcelo Cabucci, called the PR FAQ Framework. And Marcelo actually goes in and talks about some more concrete writing tips, many of which I used as source and then extended in some cases. But essentially, it's about how to write with precision, right? How to say what I want to say without embellishment. For example, one of the things you frequently want to do in writing is eliminate your adjectives and your adverbs. You want to make sure that the information you're carrying is free of any particular judgment. So you see this all the time, for example, when you get into documentation around a particular open source framework. They'll talk about how this framework lets you do things simply and easily with no effort whatsoever. Those are all value judgments about the framework. And frankly, they don't really add anything to the thrust of the prose. If I'm reading the documentation of your framework, it's because I'm already interested in your framework. You don't need to market to me. You don't need to sell me on this. What you need to do is to tell me I can build a REST API using a single class and a variety of annotations that will enable me to expose these methods as endpoints that can be directly hit with an HTTP request.
Okay.
Removing all of the adjectives and adverbs. We frequently want to convey how excited we are about the thing we just built. And so we'll put those adjectives and adverbs into it. But they don't do anything for the writing. They become additional effort on the part of the reader. And in many respects, if for whatever reason the reader doesn't think that your chosen approach is simple, then they either feel bad because now they don't feel like they're smart enough to understand your framework, or they get angry because this isn't simple at all. What kind of a goofball are you that you're saying direct bytecode manipulation is simple? What are you on?
Yeah, easy is an adjective that I really try to avoid. It does anger me sometimes when people use
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
Do
yeah, yeah,
this, it'll be easy. No, if it were easy, you would do it.
yeah.
But sometimes, I don't know, sometimes adverbs and adjectives can be descriptive. They can add more context to what you're writing.
As long as it's not like I said, as long as it's not a value judgment.
Uh,
If you say the red ball fell into the street, okay, yes, in this particular
Red is a
case,
very good adjective. It describes what you're doing. Yeah.
as long as it somehow disambiguates the
Yeah,
red ball from the blue ball and the green ball,
right.
right?
But if you say
And
the fantastic ball fell on the street, that's just superfluous. It's
right,
a little extra hyperbole just to make
right,
it sound flowery.
yeah. And one of the other
Look at me
things,
throwing adjectives in there.
yeah, well, and truthfully, it's interesting because again, in the spirit of King and Murder Your Darlings, if you write out a sentence and then go back and just by rote delete all the adjectives and adverbs, just delete them.
Uh,
Does the sentence still make sense? Does it still convey what you want it to say? And if the answer is yes, leave them gone. Just delete them. If for some reason it introduces ambiguity, okay, then put one back until the ambiguity is gone, right? Just
got it. It's an iterative process. Yeah.
yeah. But I mean, it's interesting because as as somebody who writes a lot of this stuff as part of the architecture team, I find that now it's become just kind of a matter of rote. My brain says, "Oh, well, we should talk about it this way," and then I just go back and glance, and it's like, "Oh yeah, there's a couple of adjectives that snuck their way in there. Delete, delete, delete. Does this still make sense? Yep. Okay, move on to the next sentence." The other thing that frequently pops up in documentation is redundancy. People will say, you just create this method here, and then they'll say, and then you create this method here, and then they'll say they'll create this method here, and it's like, just say it once. It's all that's necessary, because people can go back and reread. That's something that doesn't happen in a spoken conversation. I often need to, because if it's a particularly sticky concept, I may have to explain it 2 or 3 times in different ways in order to get it across to people. And keep in mind, in a spoken conversation, there's lots of implicit feedback. I can read your facial expression. I can read your body language. I mean, If I start talking, you start going like this. Okay, well, obviously, I need to like shake it up some, but I can't do that as a author. I can't see, especially at the time of authoring, because that happens previously in time. Then I watch you read it. I can see some of the reactions as people are diving into it. But for the most part, I'm completely ignorant as to what your feedback will be until such time as I get your feedback directly. So we in spoken conversation we will often iterate repeatedly. In a
Mhm.
written piece, people have the opportunity to go back and reread.
Yeah.
So unless the next sentence is adding something materially to the point before, and the sentence after that adds to the point before that, you really need to say something once and just leave it sit, right?
Agreed.
Just put it there. When you get into the business writing, particularly at Amazon, Amazon is big on, they coined the phrase being data driven, and they're
Okay.
big on the notion of data. That said, Bezos also has a quote where he says, anywhere the data disagrees with the customer is probably correct.
Hmm.
In other words, we can do all this, gathering of numbers from dashboards and whatnot. But, and again, one of the tenets, one of the philosophies that Amazon really, really lives by, one is being data driven, another is being customer obsessed. They want to get out and talk to customers directly. As an architect, this is something that I can very much learn from because my customers are, in fact, the people who are going to build software within this architecture.
Right.
And so, one of the things that architects frequently forget to do is to go out and actually talk to the developers. Like, okay, hey, if we do this, how well does that work for you?
Right.
How well is that going to actually? The developers are frequently on the front lines, working with the product folks and working with the customers directly and so forth. How well is this going to actually solve the problem that you face? And that form of feedback, I mean, that's the critical missing piece for a lot of architects is that feedback loop, right? How do I get feedback on my architecture?
Right.
And forcing you to be customer obsessed and data driven really drives you towards trying to gather some of that information up front rather than just, oh, well, I've got a list of requirements over here. I'm just going to operate off of that as if that is, from the Almighty Himself. And at Amazon, they talk about having data and also anecdata, right? We know the
Anecdote.
notion
What
of
is?
an anecdote is a story, right?
Mhm.
Oh, I was talking with my friend David the other day and we, blah, blah, blah. Anecdata is where I have a couple of those. It's not enough data points to really be considered data.
Okay.
But if I go throughout Capital One and I talk to 3 or 4 developers and they all talk about how Maven is a terrible build system, they just totally don't understand it. Okay, that's not really data in a statistical sense. Of the
Right.
thousands of developers, I have 3 people who don't like Maven. But it is important still. It's anecdata, right?
Okay.
So it's anecdotal data.
So
And
qualitatively, that might be important, but quantitatively, it's insignificant.
in some respects, one of the phrases I like to use is that data should be used to either validate or invalidate intuition, and or intuition should tell us what data we need to chase,
Hmm.
right?
Okay.
So if I have that conversation with 3 developers and they all say that Maven is terrible, okay, that's an interesting little confluence. Let me go like dive deeper into that. Let me try to figure out how many projects inside the company use Maven, how many pull requests actually are updating the build script.
Ah.
I mean, one of the most interesting studies people ever did, talking about doing studies over source code, they analyzed GitHub public commit logs to figure out which programming language evokes the most profanity out of its developers. And
What is it, and why is it Ruby? C. Okay.
C, it's C, which shouldn't surprise us because A, there's a lot of C code out there in the world and much of it is stored up in GitHub.
All right.
But B, you know, the fact that, and again, I wasn't a part of the study, so I only know, the stories I've
Seems like it was
heard.
tailor made for you.
Yeah, and it's an interesting way to say, okay, we often judge programming languages by their popularity, but let's also talk about which languages are in popular use, but people hate them. What's the best way for us to track that? How many people swear in the commit log? Because you and I have both done it. You're so frustrated that you finally figured out this stupid bug, and it's because there was a semicolon missing at the end of the line. Looking at you, JavaScript.
Drop an F bomb. Good, good time to drop an F bomb.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey,
So
we only have a few minutes left. I want to jump over to one more thing before we go.
yeah.
Because you talked a lot about concreteness in your writing. I was wondering if you could share some of that knowledge with us before we head out.
Well, yeah. I mean, again, look for data, right? Use data or
That's
anecdata.
one of the points right there.
And the redundancy. Avoid the passive voice.
Give me
One
an
of the
example of
this
passive voice.
so passive voice is when I say the thing was affected by the other thing, right?
Okay.
Politicians love this. For example, there's a great book, another book, by the way, talking about this a little bit, called, the book's title is Mistakes Were Made.
Mistakes were made. Yeah. That's very passive.
It's very
It's not acknowledging mistakes. Who made them? Not pointing fingers, not taking responsibility
right,
myself.
right.
Just
And the fascinating thing is, many of us work at companies that have instituted blameless culture,
yeah.
right? And so we use the passive voice a lot as a way to say, okay, David, that change you made broke the production website. Now that sounds like I'm blaming you. And in a lot of companies, that would be a blame. That would absolutely be saying, it's your fault. You, David Giard, you broke the site.
Again.
But at the end of the day, to simply say the site was broken by some changes that were made by a developer on the team, okay, that tells me nothing. Because
Right.
part of what we as engineers need to do is we need to figure out, how did somebody making one change break the website? There
Yep.
was the thing that happened a number of years ago where the intern, right, the famous intern posted something to Twitter on behalf of a large company, and that company turned around and said, "Oh, the intern made this tweet, and should never have been able to do so." And that's part of the thing that a lot of people really glommed on is, how the heck did the intern have access to the production thing? You can be blameless without embracing the passive voice, and the active voice is so much easier to read.
Yes, it's
David's
more
change
direct.
broke the website. That is so very easy to read. Passive voice, you get back into this gnarly sort of indirection. The website was broken. Okay, so somebody broke the website by a developer. Okay, so a developer broke the website. You have to do all this mental gymnastics to do that. So, get rid of the passive voice out of your writing and avoid that redundancy. Avoid sarcasm. It really doesn't play well in writing unless you're PJ O'Rourke and you do this, or Hunter Thompson. Unless like write sarcastic prose and get paid lots of money to do it. Avoid sarcasm and
There'll never be
really,
another Hunter Thompson.
you know,
I got my Hunter Thompson shirt on.
yeah, exactly. Part of the thing too is you don't need to create super flowery prose. You don't need to create prose that draws attention to itself. You
Mhm.
really want prose that will convey the information, and then just kind of it drops away. People are left with the information.
Yeah.
Your prose should be just enough of a vehicle to get the point and the data across. That's it. It'll be very, I don't want to say bland. It'll be precise, but
Mhm.
it's just like,
It'll be
hey,
professional and direct.
Dave broke the website with a change he made, period. We have instituted a new process to ensure that any changes to the production website, in addition to going through a human review, must also go through a static linter check, period. I mean, this is very clear what we're talking about. And again, notice no use of adjectives anywhere. We didn't
Interesting.
say the idiot David Giard or the loose cannon David Giard, right?
That was implied.
Yeah, well, only because
Hey,
I know
we
you as well as I do.
exactly. We are at time. I could talk about this all day. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Ted. Thank you so much.
Technology enables us to converse more regularly with our friends.